So after feeling a bit conflicted about the direction that Best of the Best 2 took, moving from a struggling team overcome adversity style sports movie about a group of US martial artists entering the Olympics to a pseudo buddy action movie that jettisoned half the things that made the first movie what it was, I was very interested to see where Best of the Best 3 No Turning Back would take us. Whether it would go further down the more action-driven rabbit hole, or whether it would try to pull us back into the realms of sports team movies. Well, ladies and gents, you'll be unsurprised to hear that Best of the Best 3 is even further removed from the first film, and is, by quite a wide margin, distanced from its sequel. This is because Best of the Best 3 wasn't intended to be a Best of the Best movie. Not originally, at least. Originally, this was a film called No Turning Back, which would star a person of colour returning to their hometown to catch up with their sister, only to find out that white nationalists have overrun the town and have taken an immediate dislike to them. Cue Armageddon and lots of heavy-handed moralistic takes on how racism is bad. The story goes that Philip Rhee, who played Tommy in this movie, saw the script and absolutely fell in love with it, deciding not only to produce it, but direct it too. After some long-ish discussions, they retooled the script into Best of the Best 3, and from there, things seemingly went downhill rather quickly. For starters, they couldn't get Eric Roberts back due to other work commitments, which some would say was a blessing, given his total lack of purpose in the previous entry. Hell, even Roberts himself acknowledged that this seemed like a very personal project to both Philip and Simon Rhee, and that his involvement in the film would kind of mess with that and be a bit pointless. So he opted out. Something he would go on to be somewhat happy about, as allegedly after seeing the film he was disappointed in it, claiming that it looked like a home movie. The main character was reworked slightly to basically become Tommy, and a few other characters were rejigged slightly to fill in for Eric Roberts' absence. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you any footage from this film due to a worldwide block in place on the footage from Lasso Entertainment, so, rather graciously, longtime friend of the show and all-round good guy, Raymond has very kindly stepped in to talk you through the plot of Best of the Best 3. Raymond, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back.
Hello, and I am Raymond Smith. I like to say that I make above average reviews of below average movies, and no movie is more below average than this movie. So what is the plot of this movie? I have my notes right here. Okay, this is blank. There's nothing on there. You want to see my actual notes? That's it. This is all the notes. For a normal review, my notes look like this. But once again, so little happens in this movie, these are my notes. Here is the entire plot of Best of the Best 3, No Turning Back. Does anybody have a problem with this Nazi owning land in our town?
I have a problem. My problem is with that Nazi.
Yay!
Yeah! Woo! Yay! Alright!
I mean, other things happen, but yeah, that's the actual plot. In its entirety, this is the whitest kid to ever exist. His name is irrelevant. He spends his entire day watching Nazi propaganda on television and eventually becomes a Nazi himself. For some reason, he has to shave his head, even though all the other Nazis have glorious mullets. His first day as an official Nazi, the guy who shaved his head murders a black preacher right in front of him, and we see a little bit of twinge of what the hell, but he immediately casts that aside and starts doing Hitler salutes. This is when Tommy Lee comes to town. He gets in a little argument at the diner and is pulled over by the local sheriff. He's all cross-armed and putting on the "why you pulling me over" voice. And then we find out that not only does he know the sheriff invited him to town, the sheriff is his freaking brother-in-law who married his sister, and they're friends. So the whole thing makes no sense. Finally, 32 minutes into the movie, Tommy Lee starts beating up the Nazis and pretty much doesn't stop for the rest of the movie but it takes so long. The first two movies both took 9 minutes for the first fight scene. This movie took 32 minutes. Then we get to the point of the town meeting. Hey, do we want this Nazi to build White Disneyland? No. So the Nazis, who have been stockpiling weapons for, I would guess, years, get into a 30-minute battle with Tommy Lee and the sheriff, with missile launchers and machine guns and bombs and grenades. And there's just this giant battle over... What is it over? The Nazis already lost and got kicked out of town, so I don't exactly know what they're fighting for. Well, we do get a little bit of indication because the killer Nazi group end up actually murdering the preacher because he doesn't hate black people enough. He only wants to kick them out of town and not murder them like they do. Oh yeah, I forgot that Gina Gershon is in this movie. She dodges a freaking missile launcher. And the movie ends with a wet fart, as if you can't be disappointed enough already in this movie, as Tommy just kind of walks out of the compound and all the killer Nazis decide they don't like killing anymore.
From a script perspective, one of the first things you'll notice about Best of the Best 3 is that it is beyond simplistic. This isn't a film that requires a lot of complex thought. It's a slow, plodding, and frankly rather dull, in my opinion, watch that isn't here to challenge the viewer. It's here to be used as cool showreel material for Philip Ree, and that's about it. Not a tremendous amount happens in this, and in most cases, scenes could be at best described as Tommy wanders around town for a bit, some racists turn up to do racist Nazi shit, Tommy beats up the racists who swear vengeance, and then the scene is reset and repeated over and over again. Occasionally broken up with some half-hearted will they won't they romance scenes and the occasional sequence of the white nationalists flying solo and doing Nazi shit. An issue I raised with the last Best of the Best movie was around power levels, the idea that the script makes its characters as strong as they need to be to take on whatever's coming at them, even when the overwhelming odds would suggest they'd be pounded to a pulp. And with Tommy in particular, they really went overkill in the last film to basically make him some kind of immortal super soldier fighter. I mean, considering Best of the Best 2 ended with Tommy effectively taking down a hulk of a man who was basically two Ivan Dragos sellotaped together, by the end of that movie, I was convinced Tommy was indestructible and capable of taking on anything or anyone that stood in his way. Well, for Best of the Best 3, they didn't feel the need to nerf him. They don't hinder him in any way, shape or form, and right out of the gate they establish he's literally as strong as he was at the end of Best of the Best 2, if not stronger. And as a result, for the majority of the film, I felt absolutely no sense of peril with this thing. I mean, who do you think is going to win in a fight between the guy who's a literal Olympic gold medal winning martial artist who's been trained in various forms of fighting for years, who owns multiple martial arts centres, and in the last film managed to full on destroy a big McLarge huge motherfucker with his bare hands? Or half a dozen flabby alcoholic racist hillbillies who can barely throw a punch without falling over, let alone take down Tommy who's only using 2% of his power. Every single fight scene that this film threw up, I outright refused to believe that Tommy would get so much as a bruise off these racists, given that I fully believe Tommy could punch a train unconscious. And for most of the film, Tommy quite literally does just go in, kick their asses, and then leave. Which is perfectly in line with the sequels, but terribly dull to watch when you know just how badly the odds are stacked against Tommy's opponents. The only time they do put Tommy in peril is the final scene where he fights the leader of the white nationalists. And even then it feels forced because Tommy is shredded and has shown for the last 80 minutes that he can literally launch guys twice his size and height into orbit without breaking a sweat. And the guy he's up against looks like Quint from Jaws' malnourished brother. But somehow he's able to absolutely damage Tommy and keep him on the ropes. They purposefully level down Tommy for that final fight for suspense, but it doesn't really work because all that made me do was call the film out for pulling a cheap trick to try and gain a sense of artificial suspense. Something it also failed to achieve because before the final fight even happens, the majority of the nationalists' compound is burnt to the ground. So it's not even like this final fight's going to decide anything. They've already lost. At this point, Tommy's just showboating. As for the structure and narrative elements, there's almost no reference to any of the previous Best of the Best movies. A passing mention of Tommy's fight in the Coliseum at the end of Best of the Best 2 is literally all this film offers. There's no mention of Alex or Travis or any of the events of the last two movies. This is just Philippery as Tommy with almost no one to bounce off and a largely mute cast who don't really do much to help make up for the slack. Given that Tommy himself wasn't exactly the most charismatic person in the Best of the Best movies, it's a bit like being stuck at a bar with a guy you kind of sort of know, but the small talk just isn't going anywhere and as a result it just feels very awkward at times. But the problems go deeper than just a lot of wandering around and unbelievable fight stats. There's some scenes that, due to the poor dialogue, result in very heavy-handed and almost annoyingly preachy monologues about racism and how you should hate people who hate. None of the characters are written with any kind of depth. The racists are just comedy-level evil. Seriously, the film ends with a load of them getting rocket launchers and miniguns and just having a big explodey shootout. Tommy and his family are two-dimensional and barely develop anything resembling depth or character development throughout, to the point that, other than hooking up with one of the women from the town, Tommy is literally unchanged from the way he was going into the movie, which left me wondering what the point was. And only further exacerbating the situation, the supporting cast dialogue would make Skyrim NPCs look like Academy Award winners. I mean, in this film's favour, there is at least a clear 3-act structure present, but even though it does have a definitive beginning, middle and end, because of the amount of repetition and padding packed in throughout, they almost needn't have bothered, as you can pretty much rewind or fast forward to any point in the film really outside of the final fight, and it could be taking place at any point in this film. Which is only further compounded by the fact that this is an action movie that's just totally devoid of any real action for a more than decent chunk of the runtime. I mean, there's the occasional fist fight here and there, but nothing grand or spectacle earning, which makes it feel very mechanic at times and just not all that fun to sit through. I find that really frustrating because I can talk about half-decent dialogue, I can talk about a film's plot if it's engaging, but this really is just a load of people wandering around, badly talking about life philosophy and why racism is bad, and it isn't until the final fight of the movie that the action even gets anywhere approaching half-decent. And even then, it feels like it's just too little too late given the 80-ish minutes of pseudo-Christian navel-gazing we've sat through to get to the crazy racist rocket launcher jamboree. Oh yeah, that's another thing. For some reason, and I have no idea why, this film is constantly delving into Christianity. From hymns being sung throughout the film's runtime to the central plot starting because of the murder of a reverend and the firebombing of his church. Hell, one of the final scenes in this movie is of a school bus with crosses painted on it smashing into a white nationalist compound. How much more heavy-handed on the symbolism can you get? I don't know what prompted the decision to get all holy on me 3 movies into a series about people who kick people for a living, but it's here now for some reason. So, yeah, not a big fan of the script. As a standalone action movie, it probably would have been passable, but as a Best of the Best movie, this is, without doubt, the worst I've seen so far.
There is actually 2 bad guys in this movie. The guy who shaved a white kid's head, he's violent, murders people, and is very open about hatred and death to everyone who's not white. And then there's Arlie Emery, the Nazi preacher that we saw on television earlier, who wants white people and black people to live in separate parts of the town. So obviously both Nazis, the leader and the leader of his followers, are terrible. But which one's actually worse? The movie asks us to answer this question. So many things in this movie make no sense. I already went over the thing with the sheriff is for us, I guess, as a viewer. The sheriff's racist too. Tommy's gonna kick his ass. But no, they're friends. Tommy knew who he was the whole time. There was no reason for him to be miserable about it and all cross-armed pouty. The whole meeting makes no sense. They're like, oh, does anyone have a problem with Nazis? And then Gina Gershon's like, yeah, Nazis. Like, yeah, fuck Nazis, and kick them out. There's 300 of you in there, and none of you said anything until the school teacher brings it up, and now you suddenly are like, yeah, she's right. There was no discussion before that. It makes no sense. Apparently, the Nazis have plenty of room to be. They don't need to buy this little part of town because they had thousands of rounds of ammunition and bombs and missile launchers. So I don't know what they needed a little compound for. And there's no black people in this town to kick out. None of the movie makes any sense. In the middle of a giant battle with missile launchers and machine guns, everyone stops to watch random Nazi fight the best martial artist in the world. And he does fine for himself in the fight. Because if Tommy Lee had just kicked his head off in 2 seconds, we wouldn't have a big dramatic change of whitest kid ever doing what he did in the beginning of the movie and changing absolutely nothing. The writers never wrote anything before. The directors never directed anything before. The producers never produced anything before. Except for The Power of One, which is about a British guy that boxes in Africa during World War II. I haven't seen that movie in 20-something years, but I don't remember it being any good.
On the direction front, it's actually pretty serviceable. It's clear Philip really wanted to put his heart into this film, but I just don't think he's that good of a director. Not at this point, at any rate. It's competently structured, but there's just nothing standout. Large portions of the film feel flat and lifeless. There's very little use of depth of field, and they utilise what space they have minimally, rather than using the set spaces to their full potential. Quite literally, scenes will use their locations really more as just a background to avoid shooting in a void rather than actually making them meaningful to the plot. Like, the fact a portion of this film is shot at a carnival is coincidental rather than intentional, and that's the kind of thing that really rustles my jimmies. When a cast are on set, they don't utilise the space around them. They often don't really work with props unless it's being choreographed into fight scenes. They just kind of enter the frame, talk a bit, and then walk out of the frame. And I feel in the hands of a more competent director, even bearing in mind that the majority of this film is just walking around and talking, it could have maybe looked a bit nicer. What I will give Ree credit for, though, is that the final all-out bazooka fight at the end of the film does have a decent sense of scale. Though, had I not been watching this movie for a review, I'd have never been able to appreciate how well handled that final fight really was, because I'd have turned off long before that. Much like the direction, the cine here is fairly middling as well. While there are some nicely lit scenes throughout, and even the occasional bit of chiaroscuro wizardry, it's ultimately just a bit bland. It sequences 101 level stuff that just lacks any kind of pop or punch. It's not badly made, these are coherent sequences that have been built using shots correctly, but it all just feels quite safe and lifeless. Part of me wants to put that down to a lack of willingness to experiment with compositions and stylization to help better sell the more dull sequences, but part of me also wants to put that down to a less than decent edit. Cuts are functional here, but this really doesn't feel like a finished movie. This feels like it's still a couple of passes short of being ready for release, with some scenes having shots that run for way longer than they need to, and some scenes largely feeling like they're only there to help pad the movie out to that sweet 90-minute runtime. It's bad enough when those elements aren't quite up to par. After all, with creative shots and a slack edit it'll at least look pretty, and with shite shots but a decent editor it'll at least be emotionally resonant to a degree. But lackluster cine married to a half-hearted cut just results in a bit of a plodder, all things considered, that most definitely did not put the wowzers back in my trousers.
The acting and characters in this movie, the white kid, he's so uneven. Sometimes you're like, oh, he doesn't really into this, but then he's fine with it, but then he's not. Tommy Lee just shows up, kicks some people, and leaves. He does nothing. The sheriff does nothing. Gina Gershon, I would have forgotten she was in this movie if I wasn't scrubbing through to find screenshots. Would not have known she was in this movie. The only people in this movie that do anything really is Arlie Emery as the racist preacher and the leader of the violent Nazis. And they do fine, but God, it feels weird to say the only people in this movie worth a damn are the bad guys, are freaking Nazis. It's just not a good movie, okay? It's just not a good movie. It's barely watchable.
For me, there's only one fun performance in this entire movie, and that's Mark Rolston as Donnie, the leader of the Kill Everyone Now white supremacists. And the only reason he's good in this is because he's so over the top and unbelievably evil, he ends up being a full-on camp tornado that actually gives the film something resembling a character. Seriously, the creaking sound you can hear through the runtime is Rolston's spine compressing from the weight of carrying this thing. I'm not even saying he's great, I'm just saying he's the best thing in this movie. Philip Rhee as Tommy is just beyond bland here. In the first two Best of the Best films, he kind of worked because he played the straight man in those movies to Alex and Travis's Fall Guys. He made Alex look a bit more emotional and cavalier, and he made Travis the racist arsehole look wild and unpredictable. Which, on the subject of that, this whole film is about Tommy fighting a racist uprising, and he fucking palled around with a literal racist for years and opened a karate centre with him. What the actual fuck? Without those two here to help present Tommy as a stoic and emotionally restrained voice of reason that he's been set up as for the last two films, here he just comes across as a silent type who doesn't really want to be involved in the film until he's literally dragged into conflict. And even then, he only does what he does because he feels he has no other choice. He's so bland that in the one scene where he presents himself as anything other than reserved, quiet, and looking to keep his head down, which was a brief scene where he attempts to flirt with Margot, it just comes across as really odd and weirdly forced. The rest of the cast aren't really all that great either. I think Gina Gershon as Margot has a couple of moments, but nothing I'd put on a pedestal. And Peter Simmons, who plays Owen, the trailer park boy turned neo-Nazi, gives it a decent go. I can't knock him for trying, but he just doesn't convince me that he's dealing with severe internal conflict over whether to adopt Aryanism. He largely just plays the character angry, which really flattens out any kind of depth or nuance that could have been developed here. Combine these key players with a less than stellar set of extras who, for the most part, seem uncertain of what to do, where to go, and how to say their lines, and the whole thing just feels really awkward and difficult to sit through. Not my kind of party, in all honesty. And finally, the soundtrack. It's generic action movie music. I wish I could say more, but why dress it up as anything other than what it is? It's not awful, it suits the tone that the film's going for, but it certainly isn't aiming for anything above acceptable, and it only seems to support the Cine direction from falling completely flat on its face by a hair's breadth. Yet another unfortunate example of a film where good enough really wasn't. Best of the Best 3 was released on VHS in the UK in 1996 by EIV, and it appears that the distributors didn't quite crop the film properly for its VHS release, as there seems to be more of the top of the frame in the shot than was in the theatrical release. I only know this is the case because on the credits at the very end of the film, the last line of the normal credits are hanging half on and half cut off at the very top of the frame, frozen until the film fades to black. It doesn't appear to have had a DVD release in the UK, but it did get a Blu-ray release in 2016 courtesy of 4 Digital Media. No extras to really report on, it's out there if you want it, but Lord knows why you would. I don't think I've really hidden my disdain for Best of the Best 3 very well. In fact, it took nearly a month of procrastinating on and off for me to finally actually get round to reviewing the film because Best of the Best 2 had been just such a jarring change of pace that it had really taken the wind out of my sails on the franchise. But it's quite surreal to see just how quickly this franchise has absolutely eviscerated itself. To have gone from a full cast of 5 to 8 people who are established as key characters in the series to one single remaining main character who only narrowly acts as he did in the previous films and largely spends the time just kind of pillicking about is ridiculous to behold given this change has occurred over barely 2 movies. The unexpected, overt Christian overtones and ham-fisted handling of white nationalist stereotypes only further works to the detriment of a film that has a less than interesting script, mediocre fight scenes, barely passable direction in Cine, unmemorable performances, and a soundtrack that came from YouTube's audio library. It feels like a cash-in picture to me, and if I didn't know for a fact that Philip Ree honestly and genuinely wanted to make this picture a passion project, I'd have just written it off as a soulless attempt to try and milk a franchise's name dry. I am not looking forward to Best of the Best 4, I think it's safe to say. What do you say, Ray?
Thank you for having me on the channel. It was terrible. This movie was a dud. No, I had a good time. If you want to see more of my reviews, you can find me on Twitter, Raymond H. Smith. Mostly it's me yelling at professional wrestlers, but I do occasionally talk about movies. And my channel is RAYHS1984. I'm sure there'll be a link in the description. Thank you. Coming up, I have a Charles Dance movie, and not like serious actor that is out now, Charles Dance. This is 90s when he was making crap like Space Truckers. Oh boy. There is nudity in that one now, so that's good. Also, the American remake of the Mel Gibson movie Tim. It is going to be a 40-year-old Candice Bergen trying to bang a mentally handicapped man. Oh joy. Yeah, things are kind of rough on my channel right now, but I'll try to get something exciting up soon. Thank you for watching, thank you for having me on this review, and goodbye.
Cheers again, man. And with that, this is going in the bin. One film left and I'm getting loaded for that one. I am not wasting sobriety on another second of the best films. Jesus Christ.
Join us next time as we watch probably Best of the Best 4, where a woman puts a computer disk that has a template for counterfeit bills in Tommy's pocket, and he kicks Russians, which may also be Nazis. It doesn't matter.